There is a psychological phenomenon that nobody talks about. It does not have a widely recognized name. It does not appear in popular psychology books. It is not discussed in therapy sessions or TED Talks or the podcasts that promise to explain modern masculinity in 45 minutes. But if you spend enough time in rooms with men who have lived alone for years, genuinely alone, intentionally alone, by deliberate choice rather than circumstance, you will notice it in the way they speak, in the way they observe, in the specific quality of attention they bring to a conversation, to a room, to a person standing across from them. Something in them has shifted, something in the way they see. And nowhere is that shift more visible, more unmistakable, more profound than in the way they see women. Not with bitterness, not with idealization, not with the desperate hunger of a man who has been too long without, or the performative indifference of a man who is pretending he does not care. With something rarer than any of those things, with clarity. Today we're going to explore that shift, what it is, what causes it, what it produces in a man, and why the men who experience it carry something in their eyes that other people recognize before they can explain what they are recognizing. Neuroscience calls what happens in solitude the activation of the default mode network, the part of the brain that switches on when we step away from constant social performance and begin genuinely to think, to process, to see. But before the science, there is the story. And the story, as always, is where the truth lives. I want to tell you about Daniel. Daniel chose the single life at 38, not after a dramatic event, not after a devastating breakup, not from bitterness or fear. He simply reached a point after years of relationships that were fine technically, where the honest answer to "why are you in this" was no longer clear enough to justify the cost. So he stopped. He moved into an apartment of his own. He built a life from the inside out, not from loneliness outward, but from the center of himself outward. The morning ritual, the training, the work, the 3 friendships that deepened in the quiet that partnership used to fill. For the first year, he barely noticed any change in how he saw women. He noticed them the way he always had, with interest, with attraction, with the standard filtering of a man who is alive in the world and has not stopped being human. But something was happening beneath the surface. Quietly, without announcement, the second year, Daniel started noticing things he had not noticed before. Not about women specifically at first, about people, about how people performed in social spaces, the careful management of impressions, the gap between what people said and what their bodies were communicating simultaneously, the specific energy of a person who needed to be perceived in a particular way versus the specific energy of a person who simply was. He had developed in the silence of his own life something that solitude always builds in the person willing to sit with it long enough, the ability to actually see. And then by the third year, Daniel began to notice how the shift was showing up specifically in how he saw women. Not as a category, not as a concept, but as individuals with a precision and an honesty and a warmth that he had not possessed before, and with a freedom from need that made all of it possible. That shift, what it is, what it contains, what it means, is what this video is about. Before we talk about the shift itself, we need to understand what is producing it. Because the shift does not come from time alone. It does not arrive simply by virtue of a man being single for 3 years. It comes from what a man does with the silence, what happens inside him when the noise of constant social performance, the noise of being someone's partner, of managing someone else's emotional needs, of presenting a version of himself that fits the context of a shared life, finally goes quiet. Neuroscience research on the default mode network, the brain system for self-reflection and social cognition, consistently shows that people who spend regular time in genuine solitude develop stronger self-awareness, sharper pattern recognition, and significantly higher levels of clarity in how they process interpersonal experience. In plain language, solitude teaches you to see. When you're not constantly performing, not constantly managing how you are perceived, not devoting enormous cognitive resources to the maintenance of a relationship, your attention becomes available for something it rarely gets to do in the noise of a shared life. It becomes available for observation, Not the anxious, self-protective observation of a man scanning for threats. Not the romantic projecting observation of a man who needs someone to be what he wants her to be, but the clean, unhurried, genuinely curious observation of a man who has no agenda, who is not trying to impress or attract or manage, who has nothing at stake in this particular perception. That kind of seeing, agenda-free, need-free, performance-free, is extraordinarily rare, and it produces something in the man who develops it that other people feel before they understand it. Researchers studying mindful solitude, the deliberate intention-led practice of spending time alone, have found that it produces what they call openness and sensitivity to the nuances of both internal emotional states and external interpersonal dynamics. The man who practices this kind of solitude does not become colder toward people. He becomes more accurately warm, more capable of genuine connection, precisely because his observation is no longer filtered through need. Daniel noticed this shift in himself slowly, the way a man notices a change in his own physical fitness, not through dramatic revelation, but through the accumulated evidence of moments where the old response simply did not arrive. The anxiety that used to accompany attractive women gone. The need to impress, to perform, to manage the impression she was forming gone. The projection, the filling in of who she might be based on, who he needed her to be going. And in the space those things left behind, something else arrived. Genuine interest, the real kind, the kind that can only exist when it is not contaminated by need. Shift 1. He stopped seeing her as a solution. The first and most foundational shift is this. He stopped seeing women as answers. Before a man has lived alone long enough to understand himself, before he has sat with his own hunger and his own restlessness and his own need for validation and learned to address those things internally, he brings all of that to the women he meets. He is, without knowing it, looking for a solution, someone to make the silence less frightening, someone whose presence will confirm that he is worthy of being chosen, someone who will complete whatever he feels incomplete about in himself. This is not a character flaw. It is an almost universal human condition. Most men walk through the world carrying this quiet, barely acknowledged search, and it shapes everything. How they approach women, what they project onto women, how they interpret what women say and do, how quickly they fall, and how hard they are hit when it ends. But the man who has lived alone long enough, who has sat with his own incompleteness and addressed it directly, who has built a life that does not require another person's presence to feel like a life. This man stops carrying the search, and when the search stops, what he sees in front of him changes completely. He no longer sees a potential solution. He sees a person, a specific individual, irreducibly complex human being who is neither his savior nor his disappointment. Just a person with her own interior world, her own story, her own way of moving through the world, and his ability to actually see that person clearly without the distortion of his own need is one of the rarest gifts a man can bring to any human interaction. Daniel described it once as, I used to meet women and immediately start measuring whether they could fix something I didn't even know was broken in me. Now I meet them and I'm just curious about who they actually are, not who I need them to be. Shift 2, he reads the room without trying. The second shift is subtler, and it shows a man who has lived in genuine solitude develops an observational capacity that most socially saturated people simply do not have. Because when you are not constantly managing your own impression, your attention is free. And attention properly deployed notices things. He begins to read the gap between what a person says and what their body is simultaneously communicating. He notices the quality of someone's attention, whether they are actually present or managing a performance of presence. He notices what a woman is trying to protect versus what she is genuinely offering. He notices the difference between someone who is attracted to him and someone who is attracted to the idea of him, between someone who is genuinely happy and someone who is performing happiness. This is not manipulation. He is not developing these skills to use them against anyone. He is simply seeing more clearly because his cognitive resources are no longer consumed by the maintenance of a shared life. And the irony of this, the beautiful, slightly uncomfortable irony, is that women feel it. A man who actually sees them, who is not performing interest, not projecting need, not managing the interaction strategically, produces a very specific response. They relax. They become more themselves because genuine attention is extraordinarily rare. And they can feel the difference between a man who is seeing them and a man who is seeing what he needs them to be. Research on social cognition confirms that reduced self-focus processing, what happens when a man is not actively managing his own impression, significantly increases the accuracy and depth of interpersonal perception. The man who is not performing is the man who is seeing. Shift 3, he stops idealizing and starts seeing clearly. The third shift is perhaps the most important and the most misunderstood. Before solitude does its work, most men approach women from one of two distorted positions. Either idealization, she's more than she is the answer, she carries the solution to something he cannot name, or defensive cynicism, she is less than she cannot be trusted, the investment is not worth the risk. Both of these positions share something essential. They are about him, not about her. They are responses to his own internal state, his own history, his own need and fear. She in both cases is almost incidental, a screen onto which he is projecting. The man who has lived alone long enough, who has done the hard work of seeing himself clearly, of understanding his own history and his own patterns and his own particular brand of distortion. This man begins to lose both projections. The idealization burns away in the same fire that burned away his need. The cynicism dissolves when it no longer has unhealed wounds to feed on. What remains is something that feels to the man experiencing it almost startlingly simple. He just sees her without the overlay, without the script he wrote for her before she had a chance to write her own, without the story he needed her to fit. He sees that she is trying the way every human being is trying. He sees where she is strong and where she is defended. He sees what she has been through in the specific way that it has written itself on how she moves and what she protects. He sees her not as a category but as a person, not as a potential answer, but as an ongoing question, the kind of question that is worth staying curious about. This clarity is not comfortable exactly. It demands something of the man who carries it. It demands that he resists the old reflex toward projection, that he keeps showing up for what is actually in front of him rather than retreating to the easier story. But it produces something in how he engages with women that is, for many of them, genuinely unfamiliar. He sees them fully, and that changes everything. Shift 4. He no longer needs her approval to feel complete. This shift is the one that shows most visibly, and it is the one that people, women especially, tend to notice first without being able to name what they are noticing. Most men in their interactions with women are running a continuous background process. It sounds something like, does she approve of me? Is she impressed? Am I meeting the standard? Is she going to choose me? Am I enough? This process is largely unconscious. It was installed early by culture, by early experience, by the slow accumulation of a world that told a man his value was determined by whether he was chosen. And it runs constantly beneath every interaction, shaping every word and every gesture and every decision about what to reveal and what to conceal. The man who has lived alone long enough has gradually and through the specific discipline of self-knowledge addressed the source of that hunger. He has answered the question, am I enough? From inside himself rather than waiting for external confirmation. He has built a relationship with his own worth that does not require anyone else's participation to be maintained. And when that background process goes quiet, when the approval seeking stops running, something shifts in how he presents himself. His speech becomes more direct. His eye contact holds without effort. He says what he actually thinks. He disagrees without apology. He laughs without monitoring whether the laugh is attractive. He is simply present, simply himself, simply there. And the absence of the performance is felt by everyone in the room. Women describe men like this with words they sometimes struggle to define. Grounded, secure. He doesn't seem to need anything from me. And that last one, the specific quality of a man who does not need anything from you, is paradoxically one of the most attractive qualities available to a human being, because it means that whatever he offers freely, not to fill a gap, not to earn approval, simply because he chooses to. Shift 5. He develops genuine appreciation without possession. Here is something that surprised Daniel when he noticed it. He began to appreciate women in a way he never had before. Not with the consuming, anxious appreciation of a man who wants to possess what he admires. Not with the performed appreciation of a man signaling attraction, with something quieter and more complete. He found himself genuinely moved by the specific ways women navigate the world, the particular social intelligence that many women develop, the ability to hold multiple emotional currents in a conversation simultaneously, the specific kind of courage required to be emotionally open in a world that historically has not always treated that openness with care. The way a woman he knew managed a difficult professional situation with a combination of clarity and warmth that he recognized as genuinely difficult to achieve. He was not performing appreciation. He was not using it strategically. He was simply, for the first time, with the specific vision that solitude had developed in him, actually seeing these qualities clearly without the filter of either need or threat. And this appreciation, precisely because it was not contaminated by possession, produced something unexpected in his interactions. Women felt seen in his company, seen for what they actually were, not for what he needed them to be. And being seen genuinely, accurately, without agenda, is one of the deepest forms of connection available to a human being. He was not trying to form relationships. He was not running a strategy. He was simply bringing the clarity of his own developed perception to every person he encountered. And the quality of those encounters, the depth of them, the honesty of them, the specific warmth of them was unlike anything he had experienced when he was less clear. Shift 6. He understands her defenses without taking them personally. This one takes the longest to develop, and it is one of the quietest expressions of a man who has done the real work. Every person walks through the world carrying the accumulated defensive architecture of everything they have been through. Every wall a woman has built was built for a reason. Every guardedness was taught by something real. Every test that feels like a test is the memory of a time when someone failed a test that mattered. The man who has not done the work of self-knowledge, who has not sat with his own defensive architecture and examined it honestly, tends to experience a woman's defenses as personal, as directed at him, as something he needs to overcome or react to or strategize around. He takes the wall personally because he does not yet understand that the wall predates him, that it was not built for him. The man who has lived alone long enough, who has had the time and the silence to examine his own walls, to understand their origin, to develop a relationship with his own defensive patterns that is honest rather than reflexive. This man sees a woman's defenses differently. He sees the wall and he sees what it is protecting. He understands the difference between a wall built from strength, a genuine boundary from a woman who knows herself, and a wall built from fear, a defense from a woman who has been hurt. He does not try to dismantle either. He simply sees them clearly. And his response to them is not strategic, not reactive, not wounded. It is patient. The specific patience of a man who has made peace with his own complexity and therefore finds other people's complexity neither threatening nor disappointing. That patience is visible, and it communicates something to the woman in front of him that very few men have ever communicated to her. It says, I see you, all of you, the part that is presenting and the part that is hiding, and I am not going anywhere. Shift 7. He sees compatibility with radical honesty. The final and most practical shift is this. The man who has lived alone long enough, who has built a life that is genuinely good, that functions, that has meaning and structure and daily pleasure, develops an honest and unambiguous sense of what genuine compatibility would require. Not the wishful thinking of a man who needs a partner and is willing to overlook significant mismatches to get one. Not the cynical dismissal of a man who has given up and is collecting reasons to confirm the decision, but the clear-eyed, honest assessment of a man who has something real to bring to the table and is asking with genuine curiosity and genuine standards whether this specific person brings something genuinely complementary. Does the way she moves through the world add to what he has built? Does her presence create something in him that his solitude does not? Something genuinely additive rather than simply different. Does the conversation they are having open something in him that was closed, or does it simply confirm what he already knows? These are not cold questions. They are the questions of a man who respects himself enough to ask them and respects women enough to want honest answers. Because a relationship entered from wholeness, from genuine compatibility, from real addition rather than strategic compromise, is an entirely different thing from a relationship entered from loneliness or social pressure or the residual fear of being alone. Daniel put it simply, I used to settle because I was afraid of the silence. Now I don't need to settle because the silence isn't silence anymore. It's mine. And that means when I'm with someone, I'm actually with them, not with the idea of them, not with what they could fix in me, with them. That is the seventh shift. And it is the one that changes every relationship a man like Daniel will ever enter. Not just romantically, but in every dimension of his connection with other people. There is a quality that people notice in men who have made this shift. It is hard to name precisely, but it is unmistakable once you have seen it. It is in the way he listens, not the performance of listening, not the nodding and the strategically deployed follow-up questions of a man who has been told that listening is attractive. Actual listening, the kind that lands differently because it is connected to a mind that is genuinely interested rather than genuinely performing interest. It is in the way he disagrees. Not aggressively, not apologetically, simply, he has a view. She has a view. The two views do not match. He finds this interesting rather than threatening. He engages with her position with genuine curiosity rather than the veiled anxiety of a man who needs her to confirm him. It is in the way he responds to her beauty, not with the performance of indifference, the affected disinterest of a man playing a strategy, and not with the consuming, slightly anxious desire of a man who has not had enough solitude to know that beauty is not an emergency. He finds her beautiful the way you find a piece of music beautiful, with appreciation, with presence, without the urgency that need produces. It is in the way he handles silence between them. He does not fill it anxiously. He does not perform ease in it. He simply exists in it at the same pace he exists in the silence of his own apartment, which is to say completely comfortably. And that comfort with silence communicates something about who he is that no amount of conversation could communicate as efficiently. It is in the way he leaves. When the evening ends, he leaves without clinginess, without strategy, without the particular desperation of a man who is afraid that this moment, if not managed perfectly, will be the last. He leaves because he has somewhere genuinely good to return to. And the simple, visible fact of a man who has a life worth returning to is perhaps the most powerful thing about him. Women describe sitting across from a man like this as feeling different, safer sometimes, more honest, like they can say what they actually think rather than what manages the interaction best. Like they do not need to perform their best version of themselves because he is clearly not performing his. That is the shift made visible. That is what shows. There is something I need to say honestly before this video becomes a simple celebration. The clarity that solitude develops is a gift. But it is not an uncomplicated gift, because the same precision that allows a man like Daniel to see women more clearly also allows him to see the gap between what he observes and what he is willing to accept. And that gap, the distance between genuine clarity and genuine compatibility, can be wider than he expected. The man who has done the work of knowing himself, who has built a life that genuinely functions, who no longer enters interactions from need. This man has high standards, not arbitrary standards, real ones. And real standards, honestly applied, mean that the thing he is looking for is rare, and rare things require patience. The shift does not make everything easier. In some ways, it makes certain things harder. The man who could once convince himself that a poor match was fine because he needed it to be fine no longer has access to that convenient self-deception. He sees clearly, and clarity once developed cannot be safely ignored. So he waits. He lives fully in the life he has built. He brings his whole self to every interaction without needing the interaction to produce a specific outcome. And he trusts, not naively, not without basis, but with the specific trust of a man who knows himself, that the clarity he has developed will serve him when the right moment arrives. Daniel is 4 years into his chosen solitude now. He had dinner with a woman last week, a friend of a friend, a conversation that started over coffee and went 3 hours without either of them noticing. She's thoughtful and direct and slightly guarded in a way that he recognized. The specific guardedness of someone who has been open before and paid for it. He did not try to dismantle the guardedness. He simply brought his full attention to what was actually present in the conversation and let whatever was defended remain defended until it decided to move on its own. She asked him what he did on weekends. He told her honestly, he runs, he cooks, he reads, he sees the three people in his life whose company he genuinely values. She asked if he ever got lonely. He paused before answering, not because he did not know, but because the question was more complex than the usual answer allows. He said, sometimes in the way that anyone who is actually paying attention to their own life gets lonely, but not in the way I used to. The loneliness I used to feel was about needing something I didn't have. This is different. It's more like awareness of the fullness of what's possible, not suffering, more like appetite. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, that's the most honest answer I've ever heard someone give to that question. And he thought, because this is what the clarity produces, this is what the shift actually looks like in a specific moment. He thought that what she was responding to was not the content of his answer. It was the fact that the answer was real, that he had not calculated it, had not shaped it for effect, had not given her the answer that would manage her impression of him best. He had simply told her the truth because he had nothing at stake in her response, because his life did not depend on what she did with the information, because the clarity he had spent 4 years developing had in this specific moment produced exactly what it always produces. A man who could see her, and in seeing her, allow her to see him. That is the shift. Not a position adopted, not a strategy deployed, something that grew in the silence of a man living honestly with himself until it became simply how he moves through the world. And it shows in every room he enters, in every conversation he has, in the specific quality of presence he brings to the people who are lucky enough to be in front of him. It shows. I want to speak to you directly now. If you are watching this video, if you are a man who's been living alone for long enough that you have begun to notice changes in yourself that you do not always have language for, I want to name something for you. What you're experiencing is not damage. What you're experiencing is not the absence of something you should have. It is not a transitional phase between the relationship that ended and the one that has not yet arrived. It is not waiting, it is development. The specific, earned, hard-won development of a man who chose the harder path of genuine self-knowledge over the easier path of filling the silence with whatever was available. The clarity you're developing in how you see yourself, in how you see other people, in how you see women specifically, is one of the most valuable things you will ever build. Not because it will necessarily lead anywhere in particular, not because it is a strategy toward a better relationship, but because it is real, because it is yours, because it was built in the silence of a life honestly lived. And the way you see women now with that clarity, with that genuine interest, uncomplicated by need, with that patience and that appreciation that is not contaminated by possession, that way of seeing is not something most men develop. It is not something that can be taught in a seminar or extracted from a book. It comes from years of honest living, years of choosing yourself deliberately enough that you finally actually know who you are. That is what you are carrying. That is what shows in how you enter a room, in how you listen, in how you hold the silence between words. It is not nothing. It is everything. Own it. Carry it forward. Bring it to every interaction with the full knowledge of what it costs to develop and what it produces in the people who are fortunate enough to experience it. You have learned to see. That is the rarest thing. Once a man lives alone long enough, genuinely alone, intentionally alone with the specific courage of a man who refuses to fill the silence with noise just because silence is uncomfortable, something happens to the way he sees. The need falls away. The projection fades. The defensive armor that used to shape every interaction quietly stops being necessary. What remains is the man himself, clear-eyed, grounded, genuinely present, moving through the world with the specific quality of attention that only years of honest solitude can build. He sees women differently, not through the lens of what he needs them to be, not through the distortion of idealization or the distortion of cynicism, simply as they are, with curiosity, with appreciation that does not require possession, with patience that does not require immediate resolution, with the kind of seeing that is for many of the women he encounters genuinely unfamiliar. And it shows in how he listens, in how he disagrees, in how he holds silence, in how he leaves, in the quality of presence he brings to every room he enters. It shows because it is real, because it was built rather than performed, because it comes from the one place that anything truly valuable always comes from the inside, from the silence, from the long, honest, patient work of a man who chose to know himself. That man sees clearly now. And what he sees in the world and other people, in the women he encounters with his whole unhurried attention, is more beautiful and more honest and more worth seeing than anything he saw before. Before you go, I want to ask you something real. Which of these shifts have you noticed in yourself? Because if you have been living alone long enough, genuinely, intentionally, with the kind of attention that produces real change, I already know that some of what this video described landed with a specific kind of recognition. The recognition of someone hearing something named that they have been experiencing but not yet had the language for. Tell me which one hit hardest. Drop it in the comments. Not as a performance of self-awareness, just honestly. Which shift, which observation, which moment in this video made you stop and say, yes, that is exactly what has been happening? Because your answer will serve the man watching below yours who is 18 months into his solitude and has not yet been able to name what is changing in him. Your answer will be the thing that tells him, this is real, this is development, this is not damage, this is a man becoming something. Share this video, send it to one man who is in the middle of this shift without knowing that is what it is. One man who went quiet and started seeing things he did not see before, and has not yet understood that what is happening to him is one of the most valuable developments available to a human being. Subscribe if you have not already. Every week on this channel, we go into the territory that most conversations about men do not go. The interior territory, the psychological territory, the territory of what actually happens inside a man who chooses to live with intention and honesty and the specific courage that genuine self-knowledge requires. This channel exists for men who see clearly or who are in the process of learning to. You belong here, and whatever you are beginning to see, trust it. It was built in the most honest place available to you, in the silence, in the solitude, in the truth. If this exploration of the quiet strength found in solitude has changed the way you view your own journey, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the profound history and psychology that often remains hidden. Let us cultivate a future of clarity together. The next deep discovery is waiting just around the corner.